The bus rattled as it pulled into the gravel lot of Camp Whispering Pines. Tall trees star, I wasn't alone in my nervousness. Groups of campers milled about, greeting old friends or standing awkwardly like me. That's when I spotted them. Adrian and Luca. Adrian, 20, stood out immediately. His confidence was undeniable, his sharp features framed by a mop of dark hair. He laughed loudly, drawing others in effortlessly. Luca, 18, was quieter but no less striking, with thoughtful eyes and a shy smile that hinted at depth beneath his reserved demeanor. Fate, or the camp's random bunk assignments, placed us together in Cabin 7. As we unpacked, Adrian filled the silence with jokes and anecdotes, his energy contagious. Luca listened intently, chiming in occasionally with witty remarks that made me laugh harder than I expected. By the time we settled in, the initial awkwardness had melted away. There was an unspoken bond forming, though none of us could have predicted where it would lead. The first night, we gathered around the campfire with the rest of the campers. Adrian's charisma was on full display as he led the group in songs and stories. I watched him, captivated by his ease. Lucas sat beside me, his gaze alternating between Adrian and the flickering flames. When Adrian caught me staring, he winked, a gesture that sent a spark through me. Later, as the camp quieted, the three of us stayed up talking in our cabin. Adrian sprawled across his bunk, recounting tales of past adventures, while Luca and I listened, adding our own stories here and there. The conversation drifted to deeper topics, dreams, fears, and the things we never admitted to anyone. By the time we fell asleep, I felt an inexplicable closeness to them both. The next morning, the air was crisp, and the lake sparkled under the sun. As we headed to breakfast, Adrian slung an arm over my shoulder, his touch casual yet electric. "This summer's gonna be unforgettable," he said, flashing a grin. I nodded, unable to shake the feeling that he was right. The days at Whispering Pines were packed with activities: canoeing, archery, and endless rounds of capture the flag. Adrian thrived in the chaos, his competitive spirit lighting up every game. Luca, though less outgoing, had a quiet determination that earned him respect. I found myself caught between their energies, drawn to Adrian's boldness and Luca's steady warmth. One night, after the campfire, Adrian suggested sneaking out. "The dock's supposed to be amazing under the stars," he said, his grin daring us to say no. Luca hesitated, but when Adrian grabbed his hand and mine, tugging us along, he didn't protest. The lake was still, the moon casting a silver glow over the water. We sat side by side, the silence comfortable yet charged. Adrian broke it first. "You know," he began, his voice soft, "this place has a way of making you feel free." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I glanced at him, then at Luca, whose gaze was fixed on the water. When Adrian reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, my breath caught. "Do you feel it too?" he asked. I nodded, my voice caught in my throat. Before I could think, his lips were on mine, soft, tentative, and full of promise. When he pulled back, I looked at Luca, afraid of what I might see, but there was no anger, only a quiet understanding. Then, to my surprise, Luca leaned in, his kiss just as tender, his hand lingering on my cheek. That night, something shifted between us. Back in the cabin, the air buzzed with unspoken emotions. We didn't talk about what had happened, but the way Adrian's hand brushed mine under the covers, the way Luca's eyes lingered on me, it said everything. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. not just to a place, but to them. The tension between us grew in the following days, though it wasn't the kind that caused discomfort. It was charged, alive, a current we couldn't ignore. One night, as we sat in our cabin after lights out, Adrian broke the silence. "Why are we pretending this isn't happening?" he asked, his voice steady but low. Luca and I exchanged glances, neither of us sure how to respond. Adrian didn't wait. He stood, crossing the small space to sit on my bunk. "Peter, I know you feel it," he said, his hand resting on my knee. "And Luca, I know you do too." His honesty was disarming, leaving us no room to hide. Luca was the first to speak. "I do," he admitted, his voice quiet but firm. "But I didn't know if it was okay to say it." Adrian smiled, his relief palpable. "It's more than okay," he said. Then turning to me, he added, "What about you?" My throat felt tight, but I nodded. "I feel it too," I whispered, the words barely audible. Adrian's smile widened as he leaned in, kissing me with more confidence than before. When he pulled back, he turned to Luca, kissing him with the same intensity. I watched, my heart pounding, as Luca responded, his hands tangling in Adrian's hair. The night that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The three of us explored each other, our touches tentative at first, but growing bolder as the hours passed. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a connection deeper than anything I'd known. By the time the sun began to rise, we were tangled together, our breaths mingling in the stillness. We didn't talk about what it meant, but we didn't need to. The way Adrian held my hand, the way Luca rested his head on my chest, it said everything. For the first time in my life, I felt whole. Days turned into weeks, and our bond only grew stronger. During the day, we laughed and teased each other as we joined the camp activities, always careful to keep our relationship under wraps. At night, though, the walls of our cabin became our sanctuary, a place where we didn't have to pretend. Adrian's boldness pushed boundaries I didn't even know existed, while Luca's quiet tenderness brought a grounding balance. Together, we were discovering love in its purest form. The moments we shared were intoxicating. Stolen kisses under the stars, whispered confessions in the dark, and nights tangled in each other's arms. One evening, as we sat by the lake after hours, Adrian pulled us closer. "Do you ever think about what happens after this summer?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I glanced at Luca, whose thoughtful expression mirrored my own unease. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I don't want this to end." Luca's hand found mine. "It doesn't have to," he said quietly. "We'll find a way. We have to." Adrian nodded, his usual bravado tempered by vulnerability. "This isn't just a summer fling," he said firmly. "This is real, and whatever it takes, I'm not letting it go." In that moment, I realized just how deeply we all felt for each other. It wasn't just lust or infatuation, it was love. A messy, complicated love that defied convention, but felt truer than anything I'd ever known. That night, back in our cabin, we let go of any lingering hesitation. Adrian kissed me deeply, his hands tracing paths of fire along my skin, while Luca's touch was gentler, his lips exploring with deliberate care. The three of us moved together, a perfect harmony of passion and connection. When we finally fell asleep, it was in a tangle of limbs and whispered promises. By now, it was impossible to deny what we had, even if we kept it hidden from the rest of the camp. Our love was woven into every glance, every touch, every stolen moment. But secrecy came with its own weight. There were times when I caught myself longing to hold Adrian's hand in the daylight, or to brush a stray curl from Luca's face without fear of judgment. One evening, during a camp-wide Capture the Flag game, we found ourselves alone in the woods. The thrill of the game gave way to something deeper as Adrian pulled us behind a cluster of trees, his grin mischievous. "No one will find us here," he said, his voice a husky whisper. Before I could protest, his lips were on mine, hot and insistent. I melted into him, forgetting the world beyond the pines. When Luca joined us, his kiss was softer but no less urgent. For a moment, the game, the camp, and the secrecy didn't matter. All that mattered was us. When we finally returned to the main camp, our team had lost, but none of us cared. The fire in Adrian's eyes, the way Luca's fingers lingered on mine, it was worth every scolding from the counselors. That night, we stayed up talking about what it meant to love in a way that didn't fit into society's boxes. Adrian, ever the rebel, dismissed the idea of labels entirely. "What we have doesn't need a name," he said. "It's ours, and that's enough." Luca nodded, his gaze steady. "I don't care what anyone else thinks," he said. "As long as we have each other, nothing else matters." As the lake scavenger hunt approached, the camp buzzed with excitement. It was the highlight of the summer, a day-long event that tested teamwork and endurance. The three of us were determined to win, not just for the glory, but for the memories we'd create together. The morning of the hunt, the sky was unusually overcast, the air thick with humidity. Despite the looming storm, we were in high spirits, laughing and strategizing as we paddled our canoe across the lake. Adrian was his usual daring self, pushing us to take risks, while Luca's calm precision kept us on track. Midway through, the rain started. At first, it was a light drizzle, but it quickly turned into a downpour. The lake, once calm and inviting, became choppy and unpredictable. Still, we pressed on, driven by determination and the thrill of the challenge. When we reached the final stage, a floating flag near the center of the lake, Adrian volunteered to dive in. "I've got this," he said, his grin undeterred by the rain. Luca and I watched as he plunged into the water, his strokes powerful and confident. But then something went wrong. Adrian swam with his usual confidence, his arms cutting through the water with strength and determination. The flag floated tantalizingly close, a symbol of our teamwork and triumph. Luca and I cheered from the canoe, our voices barely carrying over the roar of the wind and rain. But as Adrian reached for the flag, something shifted. His strokes faltered, his movements becoming erratic. "Adrian, grab it and come back!" I shouted, trying to sound encouraging, but panic had already begun to creep into my voice. He didn't respond. Instead, his head dipped under the water before resurfacing, his mouth gasping for air. "He's in trouble," Lucas said, his tone sharp with fear. "We have to get to him now." We paddled with everything we had, the canoe rocking dangerously as waves slapped against its sides. Adrian flailed, his strong arms now helpless against the powerful current. "Hold on, Adrian," I yelled, desperation cracking my voice. But he couldn't. His head disappeared beneath the surface again, and this time, it didn't come back up. "Adrian!" Luca screamed, his voice raw with anguish. I pushed the paddle harder, but the storm was relentless, the rain blinding us as we neared the spot where he'd gone under. The lifeguards' whistles pierced the air as they dived into action, their movements swift and practiced. We were forced to stay back as they searched, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, they pulled Adrian's lifeless body from the water. His face was pale, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. I felt like the world had tilted on its axis, everything suddenly off balance. "No," Luca murmured, his hands gripping the edge of the canoe so tightly his knuckles turned white. "This can't be happening." I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare at Adrian's still form as the lifeguards worked frantically, performing CPR in vain. The realization that he was gone hit me like a tidal wave, knocking the air from my lungs. The camp gathered in silence as Adrian was taken away. The once lively group now subdued and grief-stricken. For Luca and me, it felt like the end of everything. The days following Adrian's death were a blur of numbness and heartbreak. The camp's usual energy was gone, replaced by an eerie quiet. Activities continued, but they felt hollow. The counselors tried to keep spirits up, but the shadow of tragedy loomed too large. Luca and I spent most of our time by the lake, the place where we'd shared so many happy moments with Adrian. Now, it felt like a cruel reminder of what we'd lost. We didn't talk much. Words felt inadequate to express the depth of our grief. Instead, we held each other, our silence filled with the weight of what could never be undone. One evening, as the sun set over the lake, casting an orange glow across the water, Luca finally broke the silence. "Do you think he knew?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Knew what?" I asked, my throat tight. "How much we loved him," Luca said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "How much he meant to us." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat making it difficult to speak. "He knew," I said, my voice trembling. "He had to. He was the glue that held us together." Luca nodded, his tears finally spilling over. "I miss him so much," he whispered, his voice breaking. I pulled him close, my own tears falling freely. "Me too," I said, "every second." That night, as we lay in our bunks, I found myself replaying every moment we'd shared with Adrian. The laughter, the arguments, the love. His absence was a gaping hole that nothing could fill. The camp held a memorial service for Adrian the next day. His parents were there, their grief palpable as they spoke about his adventurous spirit and boundless energy. Luca and I stood together, clutching each other's hands as they shared memories that mirrored our own. As the service ended, the camp released paper lanterns into the sky, their soft glow a tribute to Adrian's vibrant life. Watching them float upward, I whispered a silent promise to him. "I'll carry you with me, always." As the summer drew to a close, Luca and I grappled with the reality of returning to our lives without Adrian. The thought of leaving Camp Whispering Pines, a place that had given us love and taken it away, was almost unbearable. One afternoon, as we packed our belongings, Luca turned to me. "Do you think it's possible to move on without forgetting him?" he asked, his voice tentative. "I think so," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "I don't think we're supposed to forget. We're supposed to carry him with us in everything we do." Luca nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I want to do something that honors him," he said, "something that keeps his spirit alive." I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd managed since Adrian's death. I think he'd like that. As we boarded the bus that would take us away from Whispering Pines, Luca and I sat together, our hands intertwined. The journey was silent, both of us lost in our thoughts. I found myself staring out the window, watching the trees blur past, my mind replaying the memories of the summer, of Adrian, of our love, of everything we'd lost and gained. When we reached our stop, Luca turned to me. "This isn't the end for us," he said firmly. "We'll figure out a way to keep going." I nodded, my heart heavy but hopeful. "Together," I said. "We'll do it together." As we stepped off the bus, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the world. It felt like a sign, Adrian's way of telling us to keep living, to keep loving, and to carry him forward. That summer at Camp Whispering Pines changed everything. It taught me the depth of love, the ache of loss, and the strength it takes to keep going. Adrian may have been gone, but his impact on our lives was permanent. A reminder that love, no matter how fleeting, is worth everything. The transition back to life outside Camp Whispering Pines was harder than either Luca or I anticipated. The world felt quieter without Adrian's laughter echoing through it, and our days were tinged with an emptiness we didn't know how to fill. But Luca and I clung to each other, finding solace in our shared grief and the love that had blossomed between us in Adrian's presence. We began texting and calling each other every day, our conversations oscillating between mundane updates and heart-wrenching memories of the summer. Luca's voice, steady and calming, became my lifeline during sleepless nights when the weight of Adrian's absence felt unbearable. One evening, as I sat on my bed scrolling through old photos from camp, Luca called. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what Adrian would want us to do." I swallowed hard, my throat tightening at the mention of his name. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a murmur. "He wouldn't want us to stop living," Luca said firmly. "He'd want us to keep chasing the things that make us happy, to love, to laugh, to take risks, just like he always did." His words hit me like a wave, both comforting and painful. "You're right," I said after a moment. "But it's hard, Luca. It's so damn hard without him." "I know," Luca replied, his voice cracking slightly, "but we have each other. And that's something Adrian gave us, a piece of him that we get to keep." That night, I dreamt of Adrian. He was standing by the lake, his signature grin lighting up his face. "Don't let the world dull your shine," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. When I woke up, tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Luca and I decided to meet halfway between our towns at a small cafe nestled in a quiet corner of the city. Seeing him in person again felt like a balm for my aching heart. We hugged tightly, neither of us willing to let go. Over coffee, we talked about everything: our grief, our dreams, and the unshakable bond that tied us to Adrian. As the evening stretched on, we walked along the riverbank, the city lights casting a golden glow on the water. Luca stopped suddenly, turning to me with an intensity in his eyes that took my breath away. "We loved him together," he said, his voice trembling. "And now, we have to honor him together." I nodded, understanding the depth of his words. "We'll carry him with us," I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "Always." Luca and I made it our mission to honor Adrian in a way that felt true to who he was. We started small, volunteering at local youth camps to bring a little of his spirit to the next generation. Every time we saw a camper's face light up with joy, it felt like a piece of Adrian was there with us, smiling. But the biggest tribute came when we decided to organize an annual retreat at Camp Whispering Pines. We reached out to the camp director, sharing our vision of a weekend where young people could come together to celebrate life, love, and the connections that make it all worthwhile. To our surprise, the director not only approved but offered to help us make it a reality. The first retreat was held on a crisp autumn weekend, the air tinged with the scent of pine and possibility. Luca and I poured our hearts into every detail, from planning activities to creating a memorial space by the lake. We wanted the campers to feel the same magic we had experienced, the sense of belonging, the freedom to be themselves. On the final night of the retreat, we gathered around the fire pit, just as we had so many times that summer. Luca stood beside me, his hand clasping mine tightly as he spoke to the group. "This camp gave us more than just memories," he said, his voice strong despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "It gave us love, friendship, and lessons we'll carry for the rest of our lives. And tonight, we honor someone who embodied all of that and more." As we released lanterns into the sky, the campers cheered, their faces illuminated by the soft glow. Luca and I watched in silence, the weight of the moment pressing against our hearts. It wasn't the same without Adrian, but it was something, a way to keep his spirit alive. The years rolled on like the steady currents of the lake, but Camp Whispering Pines remained etched in my heart like the grooves of a carved name in an old pine tree. What began as a summer retreat had transformed into the foundation of my life. Adrian's memory, though bittersweet, became the guiding star for both Luca and me, pulling us closer and shaping the paths we chose. Luca and I settled into a rhythm of life that felt like the kind of love Adrian would have been proud of. We moved to the same city, finding an apartment with large windows that overlooked a park. The sunlight streaming in each morning reminded me of the golden glow of the campfire, the way it used to light up Adrian's grin and cast shadows on Luca's contemplative face. Adrian was with us in the little things, our shared passion for adventure, the playlists we built around the songs we'd sung that summer, and the way we always seemed to end up at the nearest lake on weekends, just sitting by the water in silence. But he was also present in the big things, the love we shared, the lives we touched, and the dreams we chased together. The annual retreat at Camp Whispering Pines became our shared purpose, a tribute to the boy who had taught us to live boldly and love fiercely. Organizing the event was no small task, but every email sent, every supply gathered, and every lantern prepared felt like a love letter to Adrian. The retreat grew over the years, drawing people from all over. Former campers returned as counselors, bringing their own stories of love, loss, and connection. New faces arrived, nervous and uncertain, only to leave with the same spark we'd found so many summers ago. Each retreat carried a piece of Adrian's legacy, his spirit woven into the laughter around the campfire and the quiet moments by the lake. It was during the fifth retreat that I realized just how far we'd come. Luca and I had spent the day setting up a scavenger hunt, a nod to the one that had changed everything for us. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, we gathered the campers for the final night's ceremony. Standing by the fire pit, I felt a swell of emotion as I watched the group. They were strangers when they arrived, but now they were a family, bonded by shared experiences and the magic of Whispering Pines. Luca stood beside me, his hand resting lightly on my back. His presence was steady, grounding me as always. When it was time to speak, I stepped forward, the crackling of the fire filling the brief silence. "This place has a way of changing people," I began. my voice strong despite the lump in my throat. It's where we learn to let go of fear, to embrace love, and to live in the moment. And it's where we remember those who've shown us the way. I paused, glancing at Luca, who gave me a reassuring nod. Adrian was one of those people. He taught us to be bold, to laugh loudly, and to love without hesitation. Tonight, as we release these lanterns, let's honor him and everyone who's left their mark on our hearts. The campers held their lanterns aloft, their faces glowing with anticipation. As they released them into the sky, the lanterns floated upward, their soft light reflecting on the lake surface. Luca and I stood shoulder to shoulder, watching as they disappeared into the night. It felt like Adrian was there with us, his laughter carried on the breeze and his warmth lingering in the fire's glow. Later that evening, Luca and I walked down to the dock, our footsteps silent against the wooden planks. The lake was calm, the stars mirrored in its surface. We sat together, our legs dangling over the edge, the cool water lapping against the posts below. "This place will always be home, won't it?" Luca said, his voice soft but steady. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's where everything started," I said, "and it's where we'll always find him." Luca turned to me, his eyes shining with a mixture of sadness and love. "Do you ever think about what he'd say if he could see us now?" I smiled, the thought filling me with warmth. "He'd probably tease us for being so sentimental," I said, "but I think he'd be proud. I think he'd be happy that we found a way to carry him forward." Luca leaned his head against my shoulder, and we sat in silence, the weight of the moment settling around us. The love we shared was different now, softer, steadier, but no less profound. It was the kind of love that grows from shared loss and resilience, a testament to the bond we'd built with Adrian and with each other. As the stars continued their slow dance across the sky, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Adrian was gone, but his presence was woven into the fabric of our lives. He was in the laughter of the campers, the flicker of the lanterns, and the quiet strength of the lake. He was in the way Luca held my hand, the way we navigated life together, and the way we never stopped honoring the love that had brought us together. When we finally stood to leave, the air was cool, and the first hints of dawn were beginning to touch the horizon. Luca slipped his hand into mine, and together we walked back to the camp, the memories of the past and the promise of the future guiding our steps. That summer at Camp Whispering Pines had taught me many things: that love is messy and beautiful, that loss is painful and transformative, and that the people we carry in our hearts never truly leave us. Adrian's legacy wasn't just in the memories we shared. It was in the way we lived, loved, and gave back. And as the sun rose over the camp, casting its warm light on the lake and the trees, I knew one thing for certain: we would keep living boldly, loving fiercely, and carrying Adrian's spirit with us, always. This story takes us on a deeply human and emotional journey, exploring the highs and lows of love, loss, and memory. The relationship between Peter, Adrian, and Luca is not just a romantic connection, but a portrait of the intensity that arises when souls truly meet. Adrian, with his bravery and passion for life, is the kind of person who leaves an everlasting mark. His loss is a profound wound, but it also becomes a catalyst that binds Peter and Luca, showing that true love can endure even the deepest pain. Adrian's tragedy does not erase the lessons he brought into his friends' lives. Instead, It reinforces the importance of living fully and loving without fear. In the end, we see that the love he inspired continues to grow, transforming grief into something meaningful and beautiful. This story is a poignant reminder that even in the most challenging circumstances, love has the power to transform, heal, and create something lasting. Hey, what did you think of this story? Did it move you as much as it moved us? Let us know your thoughts. Share your rating for today's story from 1 to 10 in the comments and tell us, did you like the ending of this tragic gay love story? Was it the conclusion you expected? Or would you have imagined something different? If you have an amazing story that you think deserves to be told here on the channel, don't hesitate. Write in the comments, I want to share my story, and we'll reach out to you to hear it and turn it into an unforgettable video. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell for more emotional stories like this one. See you next time, and remember, love always finds a way.